to the touchscreen.
You must apologize.
I am apologizing to you. There's only one off the wall. Let's go to the touchscreen and talk about the significance of this a little bit. We did it earlier in the show. First of all, Will, you dubbed it yesterday, and I think you were right. This was a trial balloon by balloon. How far could the Communist Chinese get with surveillance activity before we reacted? Turns out a photographer in Montana was the one to alert us to it, and the Biden White House says on Wednesday, let's take it down. They waited until this path made it all the way to South Carolina. The second reason is, what could they look at? And why would they choose this particular path? And that's why I think this graphic is so instructive. From Malmstrom Air Force Base to Minot Air Force Base to Warren Air Force Base, these are all three of the ICBM Minuteman III nuclear-capable Air Force bases in the United States. And this balloon made its way near enough to each one of them to surveil each one of them. Not to mention the fact, and Will, you asked the question about the nuclear triad earlier in the show. You've got land-based missiles, you've got sea-based missiles and submarines, and then you got B-2 bombers and others from the air. That's Warren Air Force Base. So Warren Air Force Base is the only operational B-2 bomber base in America. So they didn't fly a balloon down south or up to go look at Boston. They moved it right through the heartland of where our nuclear capabilities are, and Joe Biden waited until it got here to shoot it down. And it raises the question of how much, guys, were they able to push back to Beijing that's actionable for them in the future, because a balloon at 60,000 feet is a lot more granular in detail than a satellite orbiting that goes over one particular location at a time.
Can I ask you something that's sort of tangential to this? But, you know, you're a former military guy. Think about, like, the mindset you had when you wanted to join the military, and when you see this kind of weakness, maybe there's a great reason why the Biden administration didn't act sooner. But when you see this kind of weakness, you know, lack of action, how does that affect recruitment? Because we're in a really bad place recruitment-wise.
I would call it risk aversion.
Yeah, risk aversion.
There is a disease of risk aversion inside our Pentagon. Pentagon's job is not to be safe. Pentagon's job is to stand up to our adversaries, hopefully prevent conflict, and then if we get into conflict, to win it. Coming on the heels of Afghanistan and the terrible military advice there, they spun it as the greatest airlift in American history, when we handed billions of dollars in equipment to our enemies and looked humiliated while we had to bring 13 of our own home in caskets. How will they spin this as well? Oh, we didn't cause any harm to America. There shouldn't have been harm to it. Shouldn't have been here in the first place.
Right.
You weren't telling somebody about it, and then you waited till it passed over every inch of our country to shoot it down in the ocean, where it's probably less recoverable than if you shot it down in Alaska, Will, as you pointed out, or in Montana. And if they could do it with such precision off the coast of South Carolina, why couldn't they do it with the same amount of precision over Montana? Of course they could. Right. Of course they could. Somebody didn't want it shot down, and we don't know why.
Well, let's bring in retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. He is a former commander of the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, which was just highlighted in Pete's map. Really good to have you on the program. As was mentioned, the granular details something like this might be able to acquire some 60,000 feet above not just your former base, but several other bases in the area. What concerns you? What could have been surveilled?
Well, Will, good morning. It's great to be with you. First, let me just off the top say how proud I am of that airman in that F-22 fighter jet, that one shot, one kill with an AIM-9 Sidewinder that shot the balloon down. And so that's extraordinary. Our men and women in uniform serving day in and day out, and Pete and I both served in the military and so forth. We need to continue to salute them. The challenge is, as Pete articulated on the map, and the intent of your question, Will, it's significant that China was able to put a balloon, 60,000 plus feet, and park it over the north central part of the United States, where you do indeed have two legs of the U.S. strategic triad. You've got intercontinental ballistic missiles. You've got B-52 bombers. I commanded at Minot Air Force Base, as you said, Will. That is home of two legs of the triad. And then you've got F.E. Warren. And as the balloon traversed through central United States, Pete missed so just a little bit. There's Whiteman Air Force Base there in Missouri, home of the B-21 or the B-2 stealth bomber. I also was the first.
You're right. I read it wrong. General, thank you for correcting me. I read it as Warren, but it's Whiteman. You're exactly right.
But that's okay. Well, it's a busy news day. But the point is, it's significant. And back to Will's question, the fact that we allowed this balloon to be parked over the north central part of the United States, gathering intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance. But let's back up just a little bit. We were aware of the balloon. Actually, I would fathom to think launched once it left, Chinese airspace and started to drift over into the Aleutians and Alaska. So we have to look back all the way to January 28th when this was actually in and around U.S. airspace and U.S. territories. Then it traversed down through Canada, then the United States. Absolutely. U.S. Northern Command was tracking this, and then it became a decision. This is less a military decision, in my view, a political decision on now what to do with it. And so here we are. We shot it down. Okay, good on us and good on our men and the women. Who are you going to call? 1-800 United States Military. But now what do we do with it and how do we move forward with it? It's significant. It's a significant, I believe, move on the Chinese part, and their abilities to influence the United States and our national security is just going to grow even faster after this event.
What does this tell us about plans that China may have around Taiwan? The CIA director says that Xi Jinping has ordered military to be ready for an invasion there. Are the two tied together? Are they trying to probe us on what our capabilities are?
I think everything's tied together with China. They are very deliberate. You know, I've talked about this before in the past. They are extraordinarily deliberate in their planning. They don't do anything that is, if you will, one-off. And so everything is tied together with Chinese national security as they move forward. But all instruments of national power are tied together: economic and finance and information and military and diplomatic and so forth. And so we have to look at this not just from one event of this balloon, but the whole. And as you had mentioned, the CIA director mentioned just a few days or so ago that he's very concerned about potentially a breakout of China and Taiwan and invasion and so forth. They may have the capability to do this in 2027. So that's of significance. Let's also keep in mind the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the largest land invasion since World War II, is really, keeping us focused on Ukraine, Russia. China and President Xi is absolutely watching that extraordinarily close. Yeah. How we prepare, how we support. Are we going to leave our friends and allies again, like we did in Afghanistan with that debacle of a withdrawal? And so this is very important. My last point here is that in my 34 years and 11 years since I've retired, I've never seen a more, frankly, a difficult national security environment for any administration, but particularly for the Biden administration. Russia, China, obviously you've got North Korea and with Iran. So the point is that we've got to keep a main focus not only on U.S. national security interests, but how to make sure that our allies and our friends will know that the United States will stand by them, as well as our adversaries will know, Will, and I think, Pete, you picked up on this. They only understand strength. And so the only way we're going to maintain peace is through strength.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really quickly, we've been talking all about the military bases there. Obviously, that's going to be of interest to them. But that balloon went over our heartland, and we know that China's gobbling up farmland. They're trying to, corner in some ways our food supply as well. Does that concern you as well, Lieutenant General?
I'm very concerned. Rachel. You probably saw in the press a couple months or so ago that the Chinese, however you want to couch them, but they were buying property outside of Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is a major installation for unmanned aerial vehicles for training as well as operating. And so I think we need to be on very close watch starting now. And there is, again, I don't trust the Chinese at all. We've got to make sure that we stand up tall with them. We have capabilities, but we also have to rally our allies and friends, and well as the American. This is a wake-up call for the American people also, Rachel. And so, again, I don't want anybody waking up Monday morning on eggshells, but the only way we're going to maintain peace is through strength.
Yeah.
Lieutenant General Newton, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. Very insightful.
Thank you, Lieutenant General.
Good morning.
You guys,
share something with you?
Sure, and I want to make a point on something that he said as well.
This is just to your question to Pete earlier. This is a quote from Casey Wardinsky. He's a former Assistant Secretary of the Army. He said, because of a situation like this, for example, who chooses to join this team? This will make recruiting harder because people are going to look at this and say, well, this is a feckless bunch.
Yeah, I didn't answer your question. I mean, that's exactly right.
Yeah, about the recruitment.
Ultimately, when we look weak and we don't act and we're not decisive, people look around and go, why do I want to be a part of that?
100%. And one last point I want to make, now that you said the one silver lining of all this is that we now know this is our geopolitical enemy. This is our economic enemy, the Chinese. Whoever is working with the Chinese government to sell our farmland near our bases, I don't know if those are investment firms, real estate agents. I don't know who's providing cover for the Communist Party and Chinese. That's treasonous. And we ought to be treating people who do business with the Chinese in ways that damage our country and our national security. We ought to treat them as such. It's shameful.
This is total war for China.
Yes.
Mao Zedong once said, I believe it's, politics is war without the bloodshed, and war is politics with the bloodshed. It's all about advancing their control and their power, whether it's kinetically or non-kinetically.
Yeah.